Pundit, looking back, do you think D&D was making D&D more accessible as a win or a loss for the greater hobby, regardless of how well it sold? Well, I think it was. I still think it was a win, because there was a lengthy decline. We know this now because somebody leaked a whole bunch of the sales figures from like the TSR era all the way up to about 2020, and there was some very serious decline that was going on. And obviously, not everybody who got on the 5th edition bandwagon, especially when it became kind of a fad, is going to keep playing. But I am certain that there were people who even at the time, were also looking at other RPGs, and who now, after the 5th edition era, are looking at other stuff. Some of whom I know people who started with 5th edition and ended up playing OSR games. So, it is important, as much as it actually benefits me every time that Wizards screws up, me and everybody else in the OSR, for example. But the OSR started to thrive, remember, when 4th edition came out, and 4th edition sucked, right? I thought it was going to be the worst edition ever. I was wrong. But because 5.5 is sold way worse than 4th edition. When that was happening, the OSR started to boom. Right. And so every time that the main flagship of RPGs is doing badly, the indies become more successful. So it kind of goes against my own interests. But I also believe that it's important for the hobby that the vanguard game of the hobby should be something that attracts a lot of people,
No, I agree with that too. And I think that we're starting to see numbers that support that. With 5th edition bringing a lot of new blood into the hobby, the glow of Dungeons and Dragons on the marquee is starting to wear off, and we're seeing this with the boost of indie market right now. We did a show about it last week for our main podcast, because not only are we seeing it generally in the hobby, but specific to our podcast, our biggest segment of growth is 24 to 35 right now. Mm-hmm. And that says to me that these folks that were brought in this era are now looking to mature into something else. And they're looking at all of the other options and saying, there is a bigger world. So this is definitely a good thing.
Yeah.
We do have to contend with the Sparkle Troll element, but they're easily dismissed and laughed at this point, because I think the pendulum is swinging back from that extreme, hopefully back towards a moderate level where that sort of stuff just isn't going to fly.
Yeah. Well, Surly Old Wolf here says, nerd stuff was better when it was enjoyed by nerds. It's like your favorite band going mainstream. Next thing, they're singing Love Bells. Now, I don't know when you started role-playing, Old Wolf, but I started role-playing. I was about 11 years old. And that was right at the tail end of the original D&D fad, right? Because D&D became a big fad in the early to mid 80s, right? And when I first started playing, there were like all kinds of people who were playing, right? There was punk rockers and heavy metal people and skaters and and football players and whatever, right? So like I often say that 11-year-old me was the nerdiest kid at the table when I started playing, and then about 5 years later, I was the least nerdy person at the table, right? Because the fad had ended, and then you only had the nerds, right? So I think that if that was the time period when you were first gaming, you might have thought that it was always a nerd thing, but it wasn't. There was a time when it had gone pretty mainstream, right? Certainly with people that were kind of more alternative being more into it, but it wasn't something that was exclusive to nerds. And
right.
Again, I think that it's usually the game, the hobby rather, is better when you have a wide variety of people who are playing it, with the caveat regarding Sparkle Trolls, right? That it's better when the people who are playing it are interested in it as a game. not as something else, not as a fashion statement or as a lifestyle choice or some shit like that, right?
Not therapy.
That is the real problem, right? It's not the regular, the normies who are the problem. It's the theater kids,
Right. I think that poisons the well, and they're a smaller segment, but they have a huge voice, especially in online circles. And that's why there's this perception that this extreme is really the bubble that's in the middle. And I do my best to point out that that's not the case.
Yeah. But they also screwed themselves, right? Because they ended up filling Wizards of the Coast with these useless people, and that's killed it for them,
Right.
And now everything's turning around again, so that's good. Josh Peter says demographics is destiny, so making D&D more accessible is a good idea. Yeah. Is there a tracker on TTRPG as a whole sales to see what the actual figures are in smaller corporate? Well, there is one important tracker. There's actually a couple of important trackers. One is DriveThruRPG sales, right? Another one is Amazon rankings, right? But probably one of the most reliable ones is Kickstarter projects. And I pointed out now that it's been for the last, I guess, 6 years now, that every year OSR projects on Kickstarter have become more and more successful, to the point that now that as of about a year and a half, 2 years ago, they overshadowed third-party D&D products. So there is definitely growth that is still happening there.
And there's growth that's being recognized by the platform itself. Kickstarter just recently finally opened up a dedicated TTRPG push and category and that sort of thing. Before, it was all just sort of lumped in with the other projects that were in gaming. Now Kickstarter has recognized that this growth isn't going away, and they've segmented it out. That was a big tell for me. I got a question for you, Pundit.
Hang on one sec before we go to your question for me. We've got a super chat here, $5 Canadian from Jeff Ramdenkar. He says, what would you say are the best and worst rules and game mechanics you've seen in the current generation of OSR products? Actually, that's not necessarily a question for me. He left it open.
Yeah.
So if you want to take a shot at that, Ryan, you can.
I like traditional initiative. I think that is one of the strongest elements from the OSR, that if you're looking to create or homebrew something for your table, or even make a project and design something of your own. I also, specific mechanics from OSR that would be really, really good is making sure that the game has an inherent mechanical balance, as opposed to like a challenge rating style balance. What am I talking about by that? Look at things like the difference in the XP tables between classes, right? Those are there for a reason. We talk about that a little bit on the show that's going to be coming out on Tuesday. There was a lot of thought put into the nuances of things like, why do wandering monsters appear? It's not just there's an Ankeg roaming around in the forest. It's a management tool for the system. And when you sort of connect the dots between how does this tie to party and resource management in the OSR, that's a sweet game mechanic. Worst rules? I like OSR stuff, so this one's tough. Trying to think of something that stands out to me that I dislike. We could argue sort of the intangible of hit points till the cows come home, but that's just inherent in the fact that it's a game. I don't know that it's necessarily a bad mechanic. It's I was a fan of like wound points versus traditional hit points for a minute there, and That's sort of in flux. Pundit, do you have anything that you would say sticks out as really a bad mechanic?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind in terms of both rules and mechanics, because they kind of come together, is the whole like black hack thing, where you get this. It becomes, first of all, it supposedly it means that you don't have the same. It changes the division between DM and players, and second, it becomes something that is way too simplistic and generic. It misses some of the, and you see there are some other systems too that like they tried to make, because one of the elements of OSR play is that you have sets of sub rules, right, that are going to work different. Like morale doesn't get rolled on a d20, right, and stuff like that, right, or reaction rolls or things like that. And if you go into like making it like everything is the same mechanic, that takes a bit away from OSR. Obviously the best rules are my rules, but that you should have seen that one coming. But I mean, I got inspiration from some very great rule systems, including Lamentations of the Flame Princess, Dungeon Crawl Classics, right? Those are two of my favorite. And all of the kind of Stars Without Number and stuff, all the stuff that was produced by, what's the name of the company?
Crawford.
Yeah. So those were genius, and there are lots of great, there are far more good rules. Well, there probably are. There's probably a lot of really mediocre and bad OSR games, but they never sell anything, right? But the number of successful OSR games that have good rules are much more than the successful ones that somehow became successful in spite of having not that good rules, right? Dad and Son says, my son's in theater and he's the only straight male student there.
Oh, good. He's going to get a lot of tail.
We have got another super chat here, so you're gonna have to hold that question a little bit longer. Super chat.
I don't even know if I remember what it was.
I sometimes think I'm a sucker, right? Because I watch like Diversity and Dragons, and he'll only answer people's questions if they put a super chat in there, right? But I can't help myself. DLSD sends $5 American, and he says, any tips on getting an indie game above all the noise and oversaturation in the market right now without breaking the bank via paid advertising? Well, this is a tricky question, right? Because my first answer that I'm kind of like drawn to do is say, well, you could be the RPG pundit, right? Because I've never advertised some of that. Sometimes some of my publishers do a bit of advertising, but even that is rare, right? And I think that, I mean, advertising can be fine in certain contexts, but it is much more important that you first get a name for yourself, you get a presence, right? And then you make very good use of social media, and you have to be a self-promoter, right? I know that some people, including on this chat, will be making quips about my levels of self-promotion, but that is an important part, right? You have to tell everybody why your game is good, show them the game, remind them that the game is there. And a large part of the job after you've written the rule books is to sell them, right? And to sell them through yourself, through your personality, through social media, YouTube, guest slots and things like that, right? All of that is, I think, the most vital part of it, right? Because I've seen some games, by the way, that were really great games that the person just put it out there and then they never got anywhere because nobody really ended up hearing about it, or very few people did.
Right. So the signal to noise ratio is so high right now that you really have to make the game a personality so that people are interested to see what's between the covers. It's tough right now. I would not want to release a core system. I looked a couple months back because we had a similar question that popped up on Drive-Thru RPG. There are over 23,000 core rule systems.
Yep.
That's a big sea to swim through. So
not all of those are OSR games, but yes.
No, but just generic.
There's a ton, yeah, and that also means that if you're making a generic RPG, no matter how much you think it's going to be wonderful, you've got to do like massive efforts to be able to get it moving, right?
Right. It is a very daunting task, especially for someone that is just starting out, because not only then do you have to make the game a personality, but you almost have to adopt a personality yourself to market it. Pundit's absolutely right. If people aren't talking about it, it doesn't exist. So you have to talk about it to the point where, yeah, you self-promote it. Well, there's a reason that Pundit holds up his books, not only because he believes that they're good, but he wants to get that awareness out there so that if someone looks at this and says, this is something that could fit into my table, it's up here, and then they can seek it out, because you're up against $1 million budgets in some cases, even for Kickstarters, sometimes. Right?
Yep.
If you look at some of the Kickstarters that are not necessarily Wizards of the Coast, but they are other top tier publishers, there is advertising money there. There is influencer money that they're throwing at people there. And you have to fight against all of that. It's a big uphill battle. That's why I say anybody that writes something deserves some sort of credit. It's a matter of if you can create this persona for the product to have it have this heightened awareness that you need to sort of go with. And that's tough. That's really, really tough.
It can be, yeah. I'm going to add just one more little question here, because otherwise I'm going to forget about it. Pundit, I know you've had a long-running DCC campaign. Would you classify DCC as an OSR game? How do you feel about Goodman Games? Well, I have had probably the longest-running DCC campaign game in history. We play every 2 weeks for the last 14-plus years. Now it's over 14 years that we've been playing it. And I think DCC was absolutely brilliant. The core rules of DCC, they showed just what you can do when you end up crafting a system to fit a concept, and within the old school rules, pretty much. I know that there are some bits and bobs of it that are like third edition, like the saving throws and stuff like that. But it is essentially, I would certainly classify it as an OSR game, and I can say that because I've made OSR books that I use with that game, and likewise I've used stuff from that game in the OSR. Now, Goodman Games has become very woke, and so that is the one disadvantage of that, and I wouldn't. It leads me to not want to suggest that people purchase it, unfortunately, because they don't really like you. I would say instead, check out World of the Last Sun, my campaign setting of that campaign, and the Gonzo Fantasy Companion, which is also based on mechanics and weird stuff that I've used, generators and stuff like that I've used for that campaign. And you can use that with any OSR system pretty much. So there we go. All right. So you had a question for me.
I have no idea what it was.
Well, that does happen at our age.
If someone in the chat remembers what we were talking about generically, maybe it'll spark one of the synapses. I've absolutely lost it. So
well, we've got another question here for both of us. What's your two's take on the LitRPG craze, both in novels and now moving into tabletop gaming?
It's 90% romantasy, so I don't give a shit.
Yeah, it's young adult novel garbage.
Right.
Pundit, how do you feel about the specialist in place of the thief in Lamentations of the Flame Princess? Well, Lamentations of the Flame Princess was my inspiration for my Dark Albion. My Dark Albion campaign started out as a Lamentations campaign. That very quickly we realized it wasn't medieval authentic enough, and we had to change a whole bunch of stuff, and it eventually evolved into Lion and Dragon, right? And obviously in Lion and Dragon, I put the thief class in, right? But in fact, I think the specialist class was very interesting, but it just wasn't. I think that it could have been expanded to be other types of specialists, right? And in fact, in my campaign, rather early on, we had one character who wanted to be like a medieval physician, right? And so we kind of modified the specialist class to fit that particular aspect to it, you know. So I still think, you know, Lamentations, at the time it came out, it was revolutionary, and it had a lot of potential for stuff to be built on top of that, right? If anything, nowadays it looks kind of like not all that radical compared to other products, second and third wave products that came out after it, right? But it was revolutionary at the time.
I think that I'm a very much less is more guy, but specific to the specialist, that could have been broken out. I wanted a independent, very fleshed out thief or rogue. There is such a thing as too generic, right? I always say only be as specific as necessary, and it just didn't cross over the line. So the example that you gave from your campaign fits perfectly. You know, you have someone that, like a plague doctor, you're going to have to fill in a lot of the gaps on your own, which is fine. That's part of what the hobby is. That's what we do at the table. But you could have branched it out a little bit more to have a specific character, because the thief is so, you know, it's an icon in the classes for our hobby.
Well, but I mean, you could run the specialist as a thief, but you could also, in theory, you could replace those with other type of skills or lores or whatever. And
right, you could have a specialist that would be a builder or a blacksmith, and just fill in those gaps as well in Lamentations. I like Lamentations. I'm not bagging on it by any means, but it's one of those areas where I wanted just a little bit more separation. Yeah, certainly. What were we talking about?
I'm not sure. Did he also become a barber? No, he wasn't. He wasn't a surgeon. He was a doctor, right?
Like a plague doctor.
Well, plague doctors are actually post-medieval, but he was you know, in the medieval period. You're quite right, Shirley, that surgery was seen as a lesser specialty than being a medical a physician, right? Which was someone who would prescribe all kinds of apothecarial potions and treatments of other kinds to cure disease, right? Whereas surgery, you know, was usually done by barbers. So yeah. All right. Well, since you haven't remembered your question, I'll move on to my next question. Was if you've got any, you know, apart from your social media stuff, have you got any other projects that you've been working on?
I do. I'm next week. I'm actually going to do the first public play test of a new supplemental game for your table. It is a map making cooperative experience that you start effectively with a blank piece of paper or a poster board, and through the role play and the creation that happens at the table, at the end you're going to have a chunk of a realm that's fully fleshed out that you can use and drop into a scenario. It's tentatively titled Magister Operis, because that's exactly what everybody at the table is doing. Think of it as a round robin with open-ended story mechanics. Here's a blank slate. Draw something on the map, tell me about it, and then there's a set of companion charts and tables that are going to give you more specific scenarios that the table then talks about and develops the map through that process. It's very, very different, very, very experimental. I fully expect it to fail, but I put a lot of work into it, and I think that people are going to like it once they see it and are able to have their group effectively be world builders within the confines of this structured game. So that's coming soon.
That's interesting.
There's a couple of I pulled inspiration from board games, tabletop games, and just discussion that happened. And the way that my friends and I sit down, I have one really good friend, his name's Dan. From the time that we were teenagers through today, we could still sit down with, you remember the old sort of procedurally generated books, the central casting books. They had like the dungeon generator and that sort of thing.
Remember that? Yeah.
We would sit down and let's say we were doing a dungeon. As we, roll and get what the room is and put it on the map, just through us having a good time sitting around and doing this, we would tell a story and sort of create, think about it like a mini adventure or a tale that goes with it. That was sort of the root of where this came from. And then I looked at what else was out there, because great creators create, exceptional creators steal and make it their own. And I pulled all of these influences, and I've come out with something that you could literally have one session, 3 to 5 hours, and walk away with a chunk of the realm fully fleshed out, including history, lore, tragic events, things that happen, interesting scenarios, all ready to go. And then you take that to your table with your system of choice and move your campaign on from there. So it's not specifically like a core rules system or an adventure. It is a game supplement in the true definition of that.
It's a generator.
Yeah, that's what's coming out. It's a collaborative storytelling, and I don't want to use that word because it's loaded, but that's what it is. A generator that has this framework behind it so that you're guaranteed to have a good finished product at the end of the game.
Well, that sounds very interesting. I'm not sure I would go the story gaming route, but I would probably have used some mechanics or something like that.
There are mechanics, right? Everything that you do is based on mechanics behind the game.
Oh, okay, all right.
But it's like when my buddy and I were making the dungeon, there's this mechanical structure that comes in that causes the placement, and then you fill in the story at the table. So that's why I don't like using the term story game, because that's loaded. It is a game that involves structure and building and creativity that also has story layered on top of it.
So what by that do you mean so that it's basically a world building system?
Yes.
And what you're calling story is actually the factions or groups or kingdoms or the histories of the thing. Yeah, well that is all.
Lore,
that's actually how you create a world. Yeah.
Right. So there you go.
Oh, that sounds good.
I've learned from the master here. I'm not going to say that it is using story. I'm going to say that it is a collaborative world building experience.